A bit about Israeli unicorns and how we grow them.
Israel is doing 50% of export in high tech.
We can see the results with Israel leading with the number of Nobel Prize winners.
The cybersecurity sector. Do you look at Europe?
And isn't it too high and maybe we should stop investing?
Let's give an applause to Arik. He has prepared a very detailed and sharp presentation why Israel is important for your attention as beginner angel investor. Why to make steps in Israel makes sense, why it's so vibrant, what kind of opportunity exists. And for our Italian guests today, I specifically asked Arik to give 5-point recipes how you can copy this innovation environment with 5 easy steps for Italy and kill your unemployment among young people 30% to Israeli level of 6%, 5 times. Arik, the floor is yours.
For over 25 years, Arik has been founding, growing, and financing innovative technology companies. He is co-founder of Glilot Capital. He also served as an officer and engineer in an elite IDF technology unit. He is a board member of IATI, Israel Advanced Technology Industries, and of the Technion Friends Society.
I'm a partner at an Israeli venture capital fund called Glilot Capital. I'm one of the 2 founders of the fund. We started in 2011, so a bit more than 10 years ago. And we invest in Israeli startups, and I'm going to talk a lot about what we do, the industries that we invest in, etc. Just to tell you a bit about what we've been doing in Glilot. So this is a list of the companies that we invested in through the years. You can see the ones that are marked with blue are the ones that already got acquired. So we had a profitable exit with these companies. So they are the ones, obviously, that we invested in at the beginning of the road, 2011. So the first fund invested in 8 companies. 7 out of them already got acquired. And number 8, UAPI, is actually going public in a couple of weeks. From the second fund, which is 2015, we already had 5 exits. And some other great companies which are going to continue to grow in value in the next few years. And the next fund from 2019, we have so far, not all of them are here, we have already 11 portfolio companies growing very nicely. So we keep the track, and at the beginning of the year we raised a growth fund. Because all of these funds, which you see here, are very early stage funds, seed stage funds. But we raised also a fund that is doing later stage investments and also invested in 6 companies doing very well. In terms of the returns, so the first fund, which is already depleted, we finished pretty much all the investments there. It returned 85%, close to 85% annual. So yeah, we were very happy with the results. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a bit the Israeli technology ecosystem, ideas why Israel became what it is today. A bit about Israeli unicorns and how we grow them, how to invest in Israeli unicorns, or the ecosystem in Israel of investors, and also a few words about the new verticals to invest in. Zohar mentioned cybersecurity. We did a lot of cybersecurity investments, but other areas as well. If we look today, we have the highest R&D per capita ratio in the world. We have the highest export of technology in the world. Many other economic parameters that are really unique. And when you look at this tiny country, we are less than 10 million people with a lot of geopolitical challenges, because if you look at the map, practically Israel is like an island. Yeah, we do have like a border with our neighboring countries, but we cannot really do business with them, either because they don't like us or they are very poor economies. So we're an island. How it became that Israel is such a leading country when it comes to technology. And I'm going to talk about 5 aspects. The academy, how the government is involved, and there was a question about it before. It's a bit complex. The presence of global technology companies, the venture capital community, and the last point about our culture of innovation. This graph presents the percentage of technology export out of the total export of Israel. And we can see that 15 years ago, it was already very high, 37%. But through the years, the last 15 years, 2019, it was 45%. I can tell you that I just read the 2020 official statistics. We crossed the 50% mark. No other country in the world has such a high concentration of technology within its economy. And if you ask what is the other 50%, they're not going to grow anymore. So the other 50% are chemicals that we take out of the Dead Sea, which we have. Diamonds, which is not a growing industry anymore. Some old, more traditional industrial companies.
Today's guest is showing us that Israel is doing 50% of export in high tech. Half of all export, high tech. Isn't it amazing? Bravo! Let's give an applause.
Okay, so I'm now. If we look at the next slide, I think that it actually started from a very strong academy. We have today, if we look at the Nobel Prize winners in sciences per capita, and if you can increase the slide, you see that actually Israel has the far largest number of scientists that won the Nobel Prize over other much bigger countries. What you can see in the picture on the left side, and actually it's small, but that person that is standing here is Albert Einstein. And that picture was taken in 1920 when the first university in what was then a British Mandate, Palestine, was established. It was the Technion, where I studied, where Zohar Zisapel studied. And the idea, and Israel is a startup, right? The country was established in 1948. Before that, there was already Jewish immigration with the idea of eventually establishing Israel. And the founding fathers, the first Israelis, wanted to have a strong university because they said, we start a new country, we need to have strong economy. You cannot have a strong economy without strong academy. And luckily, many of the scientists at that time, leading scientists, among them number one was Albert Einstein, who was actually speaking German, supported the Israeli academy. And that was the beginning. Almost 100 years after, we can see the results with Israel leading with the number of Nobel Prize winners. The Technion today, I think, is considered to be one of the best technology universities globally, but it's not just the Technion. We have 5 research universities, and I don't know if you heard about the Shanghai Index that ranks all the universities in the world. Traditionally, at least 3 Israeli universities will ranked in the top 100. And it's considered the size of the country, which is only 9 million people. This is pretty amazing. Spending on R&D. And we can see here, again, Israel leading after South Korea. The R&D spent per capita is almost the highest in the world. And that's consistent through the years. And it basically consists of 3 elements. One is the spend of the Israeli government on defense, which is very important. Again, geopolitical reasons. We need to have our capability to develop our defense or the weapon system that we need. And after that, it became also a major export industry. Also, pure science, because the good research universities that I mentioned are actually funded by the government. So the government is investing a lot of money in these universities. We don't have...
Interrupt you here also.
Yeah.
To get some confidence that this guy knows few things about military technology, I must ask Arik about his secret background in Special Forces of Israel.
Yeah.
Please tell us.
It's not really secret. It's in my LinkedIn, resume. But many of the entrepreneurs, the technology leaders, including Zohar Zisapel, who actually used to be like a colonel in the Israeli military. In Israel, the military service is mandatory. So the age of 18, everyone is serving. Some people actually get to have their academic degree before they serve, but after that they serve like 3 to 5 years in the military. And I'll talk a bit about it later. I was part of the system, Zohar was, many other people. The next aspect is the fact that we have a huge concentration in Israel of global technology companies. And if you would look at this graph 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. The reason that we have the presence of global companies in Israel is because we have the talent, but also historically, there were a lot of great engineers that went to America. Okay, there is a big Israeli community in the US, and these engineers started to work for the big companies that existed then in the 60s, 70s, companies like Intel, like Microsoft. But Israelis love their country, and eventually they want to go back. So for example, one of the most senior executives in Intel in the 60s said, I'm going back. So the CEO told him, look, if you're going back, I want you to stay and work for me. So why won't you go back and open a research and development center of Intel in Israel? And that person, his name was Dov Furman. He did exactly that. And today, a big part of the technology of Intel, which is like the largest semiconductor company globally, is developed in Israel. Actually, it's developed in Haifa. If you look at the chip on this computer, either it was fully or partially developed in Israel. The same happened with Microsoft, the same happened with IBM, the same happened with Cisco, et cetera, et cetera. And today we have more than 400 multinational companies that have their R&D center in Israel. And why is that important? Because the technology world is an ecosystem. Every part of it is working, interacting with other parts. And what the big companies provide is education. So you work for Microsoft, you get the connection, you know how to develop a complicated product that goes into the largest companies in the world, because this is what Microsoft is doing. And when you want to have your own startup, you quit Microsoft and you open your own startup, but someone already educated you, invested in you, you have the connections, you have the knowledge. Besides being technically brilliant, you know how to build a big company based on this experience. Intel, a few years ago, acquired an Israeli company called Mobileye. I don't know if you heard about it. If you drive your car and there is this sensor that is on the windshield that knows how to, it beeps if you get too close to the car in front of you. That's a technology that was developed in Israel, actually in Jerusalem. How much money Intel paid for Mobileye? $15 billion. At the point of the acquisition, it was the whole cash that Intel had at the bank. And the next is obviously venture capital. Until, as Zohar Zitzapel said, when he started Zrad with his brother in 1982, there was no venture capital in Israel. So he had actually to fund the company from his own resources. And when you don't have investors, it means that it takes time to grow the company because you need to become profitable, and then you invest the profits in the growth, and so on and so forth, which is exactly what venture capital is doing. It actually allows you to grow faster. The Israeli venture capital industry is about 30 years old. I don't know if John Medved maybe spoke about it. It started in the 90s because a very important geopolitical event happened at that time, which was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Once the Soviet Union collapsed and broke down to its specific countries, the barrier to exit, which prevented all the Jewish population in the former Soviet Union to immigrate, broke down, and immediately there was a huge wave of immigration to Israel. And many of these immigrants were highly educated. They were engineers, they were scientists, and the Israeli government, which I'm not a very big fan of, did something very right. They said, we need to develop a private technology industry, and for that we need venture capital. And they said, if you are going to invest in Israeli funds, in Israeli venture capital funds, and you're going to lose money, we are going to cover your losses. But if you're going to be profitable, you can keep the profits. And that's how the first Israeli VCs were established. Now the government doesn't give any protection, so They don't need to because it's already started. And the first investors were very, very happy. So they kept investing also without the government protection. And once you have venture capital, you can actually grow startups. And the ecosystem started to develop only 30 years ago. It's not a lot of time. So if we look at the last decade, and please go back to the slide, it's amazing because look at 2019, the green bar. Venture capital investment in Israel at that time was about $3.5 billion. In year 2020, it's already $10 billion. So in 6 years, we've seen a 3x growth. In year 2021, which is almost over, the statistics talk about between 15 to 17 billion dollars of venture capital investments. And that's for a country of 9 million people. Okay, so you can see if we look at per capita, obviously it's not very clear, the graph here, but this is the bar. It represents the venture capital per capita. And how much of this money, let me, if you want to guess, is actually coming from Israeli funds and how much is coming from global funds?
I would say my guess would be like 50-50 or something like that.
So it's more like 10-90.
10-90 or
Yeah.
90 from, you mean from Israeli?
No, 90 from
Outside, yeah.
of Israel.
But why? The question is why?
Because they make money. So it's profitable. There is a huge flow of in capital coming from global funds. So funds, and I can mention some names like Insight Partners, Tiger Global, etc., which are doing more later stage investments, are actually investing in Israel, growing amounts every year. It's true that when you go to very early stage, seed stage, which is what I'm doing, yes, most of the funds, even more than 50%, are coming from local funds. But as the companies grow, they start to raise more and more money from the global funds. And many of them have presence in Israel. They keep a partner who's actually located in Tel Aviv and is looking for interesting companies to invest in. We have a unique culture of innovation, and this is something that Zohar also mentioned before. And this is like I just copied randomly pictures that you see in the Israeli media every day. Like a new startup was established. So, there are interesting, I can talk about this culture an hour, but you can see that this is what young engineers, young technology people want to be. They want to see their face in the newspaper as part of a founding group of a team. So you graduate from the Technion, you have like very high grades, or you served in one of these elite technology units in the military. You go out and you don't want to work for IBM. You might work there 2-3 years just to get some experience, but really what you want to do is be there on the newspaper with your co-founders. You can show it to your mother. She's going to be very happy, and your family. And hopefully, the next picture that you'll be in the newspaper is when you sell your company to Microsoft for $400 million, and that's the end of the story. And that was not the case 30 years ago, because when I grew up, and you would go to the Technion and get your degree, you eventually would go and work for the defense industry, you would go and work for the government. That changed dramatically in the last 30 years. Today, the government has a big problem because they pay government salaries. They cannot hire engineers, and the government needs engineers. Or the military also has a problem to keep talented engineers in-house because they want to go out and start their own company. So what are the unique aspects that we have in Israel? And this is something which I think will also talk to this audience. First of all, Israel is a small country, no local market. My companies, when I invest in, never sell to the Israeli market. Why? 2 reasons. It's very, very small, and Israelis like to argue a lot. So you don't want to sell them. They'll start asking questions and all of this. Where do we usually go? What is the first most open to innovation market? It's the US. Okay, so typically, the Israeli companies will start to develop their product in Israel, but after 1 or 2 years, they will already establish presence in the United States. New York, Boston, San Francisco, the Silicon Valley. It's the largest market. It's very open to innovation. There is a lot of money there, and Israelis feel at home, so they go and open their company there. What is the next largest market? It's Europe. The second, and we mentioned it before, the military mandatory service. We train, we actually identify. Yes, everyone goes to the military. So you take the top 1%, the most talented kids. In the US, they go and study in Harvard or MIT. In Israel, they go to these specific technology units, and when they come out, they already have the experience, and they want to have their own company. And this is something very unique to Israel. Another point, we are an immigrant society. Okay, Israel absorbed million Russian, Ukrainians, and the most beautiful people from Riga also. And today we have people from all over the world continue to immigrate to Israel. Israel is relocate to other parts of the world. And that is very, very important because an immigrant society means high mobility. Just in my portfolio companies, I have few companies that were founded by entrepreneurs that came from former Soviet Union at a very young age in the 90s. They studied in Israel and they became successful entrepreneurs because immigrants are hungry. They want to prove themselves, they want to succeed. Look at who is running the American technology industry. Who is the head of Google, who is the head of Microsoft. They were not born in the US. About 50% of the leaders of the American technology industry are not Americans. So that's very important. Okay, let's talk a bit about Israeli unicorns. If you would look at this slide 6-7 years ago, it wasn't as full as it is now. And now actually unicorns is also becoming a bit obsolete because we're talking about decacorns, companies that are worth more than $10 billion. So I understand that few of the people here invested in Halo, but there are many companies in almost every vertical that are worth today more than $1 billion. Obviously, if you look at enterprise technology, software that is changing the business world, we look at cybersecurity, we look at infrastructure technology, and Halo is one of them, but also other interesting companies that are building the infrastructure of the data, of the storage, of the processing. Some amazing companies in Israel. Consumer companies. We're a small market. You wouldn't think that you can have unicorns that are in the consumer business. We're not the Americans, which have like a huge market. But yeah, there are also talented entrepreneurs in this space. And I believe that 10 years from now, this slide is going to be much bigger. So Arkady asked me to talk about Israeli company unicorns that actually were founded or invested by angel investors. And it happens a lot. I think that it's only a few examples, but many other companies here will actually got money from private investors and not from venture capital funds. So if you look at, for example, Capita, which is a cybersecurity company, it was founded by one of the founders of Checkpoint. Checkpoint is a very large cybersecurity company, I think worth close to $20 billion, founded in the 90s by 3 founders. One of them left and he started Capita. So he's using his money, and not just his money, also some other private investors. He said, I don't need money from venture capitals. I can do it with my own money and my friends' money. So that's how it started Capita. I think that today it's one of the leading secure communication companies globally. What are the success factors that we find in many of the Israeli unicorns? So first of all, in many cases, these are experienced founders. This is not their first startup. And also the fact, and we've seen this, the graph about venture capital, if you want to become unicorn, you have to raise a lot of money. There are no secrets here. You cannot grow a company without burning through money. And once you have this capital available, and that was not the case, 6, 7, 8 years ago, because of the presence of the global funds, you can actually raise the money that you need to go to continue to grow and become a unicorn. And the last point here, many Israeli companies actually created a new category. Again, Mobileye, before Mobileye, no one thought of actually having this sophisticated camera, because before that, in order to create like the 3-dimensional, 3D image that you needed in order to see how far the vehicle in front of you is, you need to have 2 cameras. And this is a problem in a vehicle. So the founder of Mobileye actually created the category. And by the way, he is a computer science professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His name is Amnon Shashua. So many of the Israeli companies create a category. And if you create a category, you have a good chance also to lead it. And the way to accumulate wealth or value is actually lead the category. What are the challenges? How do you grow a unicorn? And it's not an easy. Believe me, I've been there a few times. It takes a lot of hard work. And the first challenge that we encounter, which is like the downside of becoming global, you need to hire talented executives globally, which means that I have to take now a 32 years old Israeli CEO and make sure that he is actually hiring his first vice president of sales in the US, who might be 50 years old with much more experience, and to hire the right person, because if you don't hire the right person, the company is not going to be successful. And it's the sales, it's the marketing, it's the finance, all these functions, and you have to hire as a global company people that know how to work globally. It's a very, very big challenge. Next one. Also, strategic vision. You don't want to sell the company too early. And believe me, if you're a successful company, you will start getting offers 2-3 years after you've founded, because the big companies are scouting all the time. They're looking for interesting acquisition offers, and they will come and tell you, look, take $200 million. You started the company 3 years ago. You still own 10% of the company. That's $20 million in your pocket. And it takes a lot of courage and focus and vision not to say yes to such an offer. So that's another very important factor, and that's why not all the companies will become unicorns. Another aspect is deep understanding of the capital markets, because as you grow, the investors start to look at you as a public company, because eventually their exit is that you go and become a public company, and then they can sell their shares, which means that you need to start to learn and talk the language of how the capital markets, the global capital markets work, how a public company is behaving, how it's reporting its results, how it's talking to investors, to analysts, etc. Very, very complex and delicate process. And the last ingredient is patience. And we are not good with patience. Israelis like to move fast, but to really build a big company in a specific space can take 10, can take 15, can take 20 years. So the good entrepreneurs have the patience. So how do you invest in Israeli unicorns? So no company was born a unicorn. Okay, every unicorn was at some point of time a seed stage company getting funded by a seed stage venture capital fund or angel investors. If you want to have the multipliers of unicorn, you need to start investing earlier. You can do it directly, you can do it through some of the platforms, and our crowd is a great platform. But this is the way to get to early stage startups, obviously with the risk, but also with the high upside. You can also work with local Israeli funds, and then they can provide you with co-investment opportunities, which I've done many times. And also invest with the platforms. So our crowd, Arkady, and other platforms as well. This is effective today, and this is another change that happened in the last 10 years. The platforms are very effective. They're very convenient to work with. And I can tell you that from my perspective, we respect them a lot. So I worked with our crowd in few of my portfolio companies, and I will continue to work with them because they're very professional and they know what they're doing.
From the downside of the market. So how do you determine which is the proper industry to invest to protect from the down risks of the industry, of the market?
Look, I think it's a very good question. Frankly, I don't think that there is today an industry that you can say if tomorrow the markets will go down, and we all know that they went up significantly in the last 12, 13 years, it's going to be protected. You're not going to suffer from, reduction of your investment. And I'm being asked a lot because most of my investors in my fund are institutional investors, like pension funds, very long-term investors. And I'm being asked if I'm worried about the prices, because we see, NASDAQ at 16,000, we see the venture capital, the prices are high today. And isn't it too high and maybe we should stop investing because... And my answer is that I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know when the bubble is going to burst or the markets will go down, etc. I've been there in year 2000. I've been there in year 2008. What I know fundamentally is that technology is changing the world, and that process is not going to stop for many years to come, because we know that some of the industries already went through transformation. Some of them are actually going through transformation as we speak now. For example, financial services, insurance industry, the fintech companies are changing these industries, but also the automotive industry is changing drastically, and that's a process that started a few years ago. Zohar spoke about investing in automotive companies, and that's not going to stop, because even startups that were established 10 years ago, 5 years ago, they're also becoming obsolete because the change is happening so fast. So you need to keep investing in technology. Don't try to guess too much if that industry will go down, because I don't know. No one knows. But diversify and be very disciplined and have patience. Okay, because you might suffer if the market will go down. Yeah, you might see some investment going down. But for the long term, in the next 20 years, investing in technology is going to be very profitable.
The question I have is this. Israel is one of the most advanced country in the cybersecurity sector. Do you look at Europe? And if yes, how do you look and how do you scout companies in Europe in cybersecurity?
So yes, there are a few good cybersecurity companies in Europe, not a lot. Yet, yes. I think that, if I look at companies like AVG, they started in Czechoslovakia. Some countries, companies that came from the Baltic region as well. I think that cybersecurity is very, very technical. So really what you want to see is that the founders have the deep technology background that you need to have in order to have a successful cybersecurity company. For example, why Czechoslovakia was so successful?
I know. Yes. It was Czechoslovakia, but it was before cybersecurity. Now it's Slovakia and Czech on a separate way.
Yeah.
So maybe cybersecurity separated them. Yeah,
no,
you never know.
So I think that what I heard, the theory, I don't know if it's correct, is that in the Soviet Union time, or like the empire, divided the categories of science between the different countries. So the Czechs got the responsibility for everything that has to do with encryption. These kind of technologies that are very, obviously, the foundation of cybersecurity. So that's why, so I would say, yes, there is a lot of potential because you have amazing technologies, obviously, all around here. But this is what I would look at, like, where they're coming from.
Arik, thank you very much for flying and speaking to us. Let's give an applause.